Do you want to try?
Hello? So loud.
Yeah.
You all got quiet so fast. Hello everyone. Welcome to this event about the book Thank You for Calling the Lesbian Line with Elizabeth Lovatt. Hello. There will be more opportunities for applause. It's really great to see almost every single lesbian I know in one space. They said it couldn't be done, and yet here you all are. Thank you for being here. I'm Sasha Boyle. I'm a doctoral researcher and literary programmer, and I am thrilled to be here chatting about all things lesbian with Elizabeth Lovatt. Elizabeth is a writer of fiction and creative non-fiction based in North London. In 2019, she was writer-in-residence for Islington Pride and the Ruckus Archive. In 2020, she was part of the Penguin Books Right Now mentorship scheme. She has an MA in creative and critical writing from Birkbeck University, and Thank You for Calling the Lesbian Line is her first book. Please give Elizabeth a big gay welcome. We have a couple of housekeeping bits before we start. First, this event is being live streamed, so hello to everyone at home. We'll chat for about 40 minutes, and we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions from you guys, so please do ask questions. Because of the live stream, we have a roving microphone, so please wait until the microphone reaches you before asking a question. Also, we have a content maven here in the front row who will be taking pictures. So if you don't want your picture taken, please just tell Jackie in the Lesbians Are Everywhere hat. Last piece of housekeeping, the Lesbians Are Everywhere hat is iconic, and Elizabeth has made it herself along with some other stickers and merch, and so if you would like to buy any, there are a couple of extras and you can buy them after the event when you come and get your book signed, and all of the proceeds go to London Friend. Yes?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, all housekeeping done. Hugh, would you like to read us a little bit from the book?
Yeah, sure.
Do you want my book?
Yeah. It's very heavy and I didn't want to bring mine up from
Totally fair. You need to save space for other books.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I'm just going to read from like the very beginning of the book, which, just a word of caution for any writers in the audience, if you copy-paste your diary into a book, they will just publish that. So, just like the Basin diary that I was keeping at the time, I don't think it needs any more explanation than that really, I'll just start. When I was 28 years old, I wrote a list of all the signs I might be gay, to even admit to myself that I was unsure of something so fundamental was terrifying. It felt overly dramatic for someone in their late 20s to even be asking such a question. And so, I did as I had in my teens, started a diary. I titled it with my date of birth and password protected it on my own laptop, which is already password protected, kind of like a double lock, like I was trying to hide it even from myself. The objective of this list, despite its painfully self-aware, joking, not joking tone, was to document an impossibly detached survey of myself. It was intended to be an anchor of sorts, because if I was gay, it meant I was a stranger to myself. This is what it said. Tomboy growing up, does not like wearing dresses, likes plaid, mainly female friends, often jokingly called a lesbian, as if that's an insult, sitting with my legs open, putting my arm across the back of chairs, fear shandy, question mark, sports, question mark, angry, scared, annoyed feeling when people joke, call me a lesbian, happens less now. Never really fancied a boy, and therefore never loved a boy, but same goes for a girl. Did I even fancy my first boyfriend? 3 question marks. Random crushes, likes of girls outside my friendship group, but never actually my friends. Can more easily imagine myself with a woman for the rest of my life, whether platonic or not, than a guy. Get happy when I see gay women on TV. Smiling when female relationships, gay women are on TV, I'm happy. Being bored when I see another hetero couple, finding out someone is hetero, getting married, moving in, etc. Don't mind gay women proposing to each other. I like to be around women and relate to them. Dislike male company. Penises look weird. How awkward I am when boys try to flirt with me or touch me. Thinking people are secretly gay equals projecting. And spoiler alert, I am gay, and I don't know how I didn't realise just from that list alone. I was very confused at the time and thought that maybe I was doing it for attention.
You reached a really long phase. Can I have my bookmark?
Oh, yeah.
I forgot, I was going to say at the start of the event that we should try to keep count of all the times that we say lesbian, but
Yes.
I think we've already lost count. So if anyone else wants to keep count, you're very welcome to. Thank you for that reading, that was amazing, and I think it really distills kind of a little snippet of what the tone throughout is. It's really funny, very heartwarming, very earnest. I enjoyed it, reading moments of your diary. I guess I wanted to start, this book, you started this book by spending a lot of time in the archives, and it takes the logbook of the Lesbian Line of London Friend, which is a mouthful to say, as its kind of starting off point. And I wondered, when you were in the archives looking at stuff, what was it about that made you go, oh yes, I want to write this book in particular, this is where I'm starting? And then what was the process of going from finding the logbook to turning it into an actual book?
A really long one and very slow. So yeah, I did this residency in Islington Pride in Islington, and I met the archivist. I never been to an archive before, so I was pretending like I knew what to do. And the archivist kind of listed out, they had all these boxes out, and quite offhandedly at the end of the things that she was telling me were available, she went, oh, we have this logbook from a lesbian line. And I was like, I've never heard of this before. This is completely new to me. And I was, in a weird way, and I sort of talk about this in the book, I was kind of trying to play it cool in the archive, like I wasn't really interested in the logbook. I was like, I'll look at it last. And I don't know why I do that sometimes. I think, there's something going on there about, just being able to embrace your, queerness and, lesbian interest, in a really obvious way. I don't know, I felt like I had to look at everything else first. But anyway, I got to this logbook, and it's a really old, dusty, A4, really battered notebook. That I think, when I spoke to London Friend, the charity that had donated it, I think they didn't even know it was there. They were they just donated this big box of stuff. Because it's just one logbook from 93 to 98, a really specific time period, but the lesbian line ran from longer than that. And I opened it, and it was just full of women's voices and full of lesbian stories, and I was just immediately obsessed. And if you're a writer, that's just such a treasure trove, just all these voices and stories. And it was from the 90s, so it was this also time period where I was alive and this was all happening. I was about 12 maybe, but I had no idea there was this whole kind of lesbian world happening around me that I just had no clue about. And I didn't know what a lesbian line was, and I would talk to other people my age, and they would not know what a lesbian line was or what it did. And when I spoke to older people, they would know, because it's living history. You can talk to someone about a lesbian line, but it felt like people didn't know about it. And so I guess the book kind of came out of this desire really to tell these really ordinary stories. I'm really interested in ordinary people, and especially lesbian history, that gets lost so much. So part of the process, of putting this book together was trying to find a way to tell all these interesting stories, and I just related to them a lot as well. They're talking about coming out, or should I tell my mum, am I lesbian? I don't know, or I've just broken up with someone, what do I do? How do I find lesbians? I've just got to London, and I don't know where to go, basically, because there was no internet. And so the very first piece I ever wrote about the logbook was part of the residency, and I actually wrote it as a phone call. It was me imagining calling up the lesbian line and talking to them and being like, hey, I just found out about you guys, these are the things I found really interesting, these are the things I found difficult or surprising. But from there it kind of just spiraled into this 4 or 5 year project of writing about them. Just got a bit obsessed, basically.
I think it's a good thing to hyper focus on.
Yeah.
It's a rich scene to find stuff in. And what was the research like? Because you had the logbook as a starting point, but then there are interviews. I mean, it's a really expansive piece of work.
Yeah. So because I needed a way to tell these women's stories from the logbook, but keeping their confidence as well, because these calls were made anonymously and in confidence, and they weren't to be shared. So I needed to find a way to kind of retell their stories, which is what I do in the book. I reimagine and use fiction basically to write the kind of issues that we're talking about that, but to fill in those kind of gaps between my knowledge. I interviewed a lot of people either that worked on kind of other lesbian lines, or I think Switchboard as well, and kind of LGBT helplines that are still going now, that sort of started off a lot of the kind of queer helplines. And I read a lot of contemporary research that I could find, or just magazines from the time. It was kind of, what were people talking about in the 90s, what were the issues of today, unsurprisingly the same issues we have now. There's a great series of books called Lesbian Talk Issues, and it takes a different subject. You can get them at the Bishopsgate Institute, you can download them for free. But there's one on race, there's one on trans people, there's one on the notion of queerness. All these really interesting conversations that were happening in the 90s, 30 years ago, that we're still kind of talking about now. so that was a really fun kind of scene to dig into. And then I just kind of, pulled that all together on my own kind of, I don't know, lesbian imagination, and like, rewriting their kind of stories.
I really like the lesbian imagination parts. Like the book, it blends memoir, which we saw a little bit about at the start, that non-fiction kind of social history stuff, and then these moments of like creative non-fiction where you're imagining what the logbook callers might have been saying, might have been thinking, and I guess I wanted to hear from you, like, why you feel it's important to fictionalize their stories in this way, what that does for us, and then also how you tease out those details to bring those voices to life.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge practical, ethical element to making them fictionalized that I kind of touched on earlier in terms of like respecting their confidentiality and their anonymity. And just practically, I actually couldn't contact the women who called, even if I wanted to. They didn't leave their name, they were often anonymous, sometimes like a one-off call, sometimes they get cut off really quickly because they're in a payphone or, calling from upstairs because maybe their husband's downstairs. And so the fiction allowed me to kind of, I guess, tell a true and honest story around lesbian life in the 90s, but in a way that wasn't their real story. So, their names are changed, their details are changed. I kind of take in the book, you'll see in the top of the logs, there's like a kind of bolded bit, which is an exact quote from the logbook. But sometimes that actually had nothing to do with what the actual log was about. It was just my jumping off point to kind of bring in something I wanted to talk about, or something that I read in my research, or spoken to someone else who said these are the kind of calls that we had. So it was a really fun exercise, I think, to sort of do that. And I think as well, this was a helpline. People were mostly calling for help and advice about in difficult circumstances. But there are lots of happy calls as well in the logbooks. There's, lesbians ringing up to say, actually, I've got a girlfriend now, and I'm probably not going to call you again because I'm like really happy. See you later. I just want to talk about my girlfriend. She's like beautiful. So it was nice to balance that as well, to be able to kind of, I think, have that room in the fiction to kind of balance out the stories, so it wasn't just all the kind of really heavy, difficult stuff, because there's a lot of joy in the logbooks as well. There's a lot of joy in being a lesbian. I wanted to talk about that as well.
It's good to hear. Yeah.
I recommend.
And I think also those calls with like different tone, they bring an aspect to it which really highlights the fact that the lesbian line wasn't just for people in dire straits. It was a community space in itself. It was probably one of the first like non-physical community spaces that we had.
Yeah, totally. There was this incredible network basically, and my book is mostly around London, but there were lesbian lines across the country of different sizes. There were some in Scotland as well. And so they really brought people together, and they would often know each other or refer people to other lines. Sometimes if you live quite rurally, you might be, some women said they were quite scared of calling the London one because it's quite big and it's got a reputation. So they might call like Norwich or somewhere and have to and then the Norwich people would have to have like a list of everything happening in London so they could refer people around. I know I from someone in the event for Leeds, and she's researching the Bradford lesbian line, and she found a logbook in a food bank that a bunch of people had forgotten was there in the ceiling. Lesbian. That's why archiving is so complicated. But she was saying at the Bradford lesbian line, they wouldn't actually, if you lived in Bradford, you might not call the Bradford lesbian line because they all knew each other. Tiny community. So chances were, whatever you say to Sandra is going to go around, even though it shouldn't have. So it works in these kind of interesting networked ways, and a lot of the people involved in lesbian lines were organisers as well. They've done dyke marches, they've done strength marches, around Section 28 and things like that. They'd be involved in that. They're hugely important just in literally connecting lesbians, because how else do you find them if you're not especially if you're not part of the scene. If you're not kind of going out and you don't have that confidence, or maybe you live rurally, maybe you're disabled, you don't have access. They're really really important lifeline for people.
There's a great bit in the book where someone becomes a volunteer at the line, but someone who regularly calls is their girlfriend, and they're like, I just let them know that I'm not here, I'm on different days, they'll call on days, they work out a system so that she can still volunteer, and I thought that was really nice, management of that, so that people could still access the support despite everyone knowing each other.
And the London Friend as a charity was sort of a bit more official, I guess, and some of the other lesbian lines were quite proud of the fact they were amateurs, because they were DIY run, they're all volunteer run. They had no funding because they were lesbians and women, so no one else gives them money. So they're often stuck in a basement. But the London lesbian, there's a record that I found in the British Library of this woman who has come to London, and then she rings up the lesbian line. She's like, oh yeah, I'll take you to a disco. And they date for a little bit, which if anyone has experience of counselling or kind of befriending services, that's a big no-no. Date people that call that. But you know, there was this kind of blurry lesbian line between sorry, I think I've got all of the lines cut out. Yeah, a blurry line between like friendship and help and advice and kind of, you know, the London lesbian line would set up in a pub to try and recruit people. So yeah, it was a physical network and a phone one too.
I like that we're keeping the spirit of the lesbian line alive by putting a bunch of lesbians in the basement. This is where the event must be. Yeah, perfect. Were there any particular logs that you wanted to include but then didn't make it in?
Oh, that's a great question. Like for non-fun reasons, I didn't include. I mean, it was difficult anyway because it's such a huge log. And there's someone that calls up quite regularly that has really complex mental health needs, and I just didn't feel equipped to kind of go into that. There's someone else that's HIV positive as well that's having like a difficult experience with that, which I think I do mention a little bit, but I kind of didn't write that log fully. So yeah, I mean, and a lot of them quite similar in terms of issues as well, I guess, in terms of coming out to parents is like a really common theme, or married women is a common theme as well. So I kind of, you know, couldn't write every single one of their stories, so they sort of get amalgamated a little bit.
And I'd love to know a bit about, like, so you discovered this book, you were like, I'm going to write the best lesbian line book expose ever. The definitive. But then your own story starts to make its way in. Was that there from the start? And what was it like to spend so much time in an archive, but then to have to go back and like look at your own archive?
I sure did have to. So I actually have a terrible memory, so it's funny that I wrote a memoir. But I did download, my wife is in now, but I downloaded our entire WhatsApp history from quite early on to like plot out when things had happened to get it right. And in fact, I kept this diary as well from when I was 28 and kind of coming out really confused because I just would not have remembered it. So yeah, I guess, I mean, so when I said earlier, like the first thing I wrote about the logbook was me calling them up. So I was already inserting myself into the narrative. And I feel like it's a very lesbian thing as well to like put yourself into the story and like, but also I felt so connected to them. I spent so much time reading them and I got really, you know, I sort of would notice you get to know the volunteers by their handwriting and things like that, and the tone of voice, how they write about people. And I just felt such a strong connection, and you know, I felt like family in a weird way. And so it kind of felt fair as well that I was sharing all their stories, that I should also share my story and some of that. And I think as well, like, you know, our testimony and our coming out stories are really powerful and important, and there's a whole chapter about coming out, and you know, that had a political kind of motivation at the beginning, and where we are now with that, maybe a bit more ambivalent. But it was something that the women at the Lesbian Line would do as well. They would, if the moment felt right and they felt like this was a safe space for them to share it, they would tell their coming out story to people to help them. And I think that's what I was desperate for when I was 28 and really confused. I had no idea I was a lesbian, like no idea. Thought I must be like atrocious to all men, and maybe, you know, it's not meant for me and that's fine. Rather than like maybe a woman would be an option. And so, and I would see all these people, like all these, you know, celebrities that suddenly were like gay, and I was like, how did you get from here to there? Because I'm in this bit and it's horrible. And so me writing it was me trying to like plot that moment of confusion, and like being 28 and not knowing your sexuality is a really weird space to be. You're supposed to have it all figured out by then. You know, my life was figured out, you know, my job was fine, and I, you know, had a home. But this whole thing was like happening all around me. So I think, yeah, putting myself into it, just it felt kind of natural by the end of it.
There's something about that connection between like the past and our present that feels really important. I kind of want to like dig into a little bit. So I'm currently doing a PhD which involves history and looking back at archives, and it's really interesting because it's LGBT history, shocker. Not like the history of accounting. Another one in the archive again. And like formal historians are very like, the past is over there, and we are over here, and we're like science, and we're very impartial, and we don't get involved. But all the LGBT historians, be they, you know, coming from like more formally traditionally trained methods or not, are like, absolutely no, that's not the truth. That's not the case. Like the past is way more malleable than we think, and the past collapses, and we do make connections, and those connections reverberate back to the present. Like it's not like a one-way system. It's two-way, and I love that that's in the book.
There's a whole bit in the book where I talk about like the queer archive is like family, and this idea that like the archive could be, it's both like your a place that you donate to, right? So as you know, maybe traditionally as queer people we don't have like a natural or not natural, that's not much, like a family structure maybe. And so that the archive might be one place where we give our history and our knowledge to be passed on, and then it is this place of inheritance as well. So this, I think I got a bit obsessed with this idea of like growing up in a straight family like most people, like where do you get your queer history from? It wasn't at school, I was going to Section 28, it wasn't in my museums or like library books or whatever. It wasn't, you know, those family stories that you inherit around the dinner table that, you know, they tell you about Uncle Bob over and over and over, and that becomes like a story that's part of you. Like, where's the queer version of that? And you can find that in an archive. That is your inheritance, and so the lesbian lines feel like part of my inheritance, part of my story, part of my lesbian history, and so I think that's why I'm a bit emotional about it, because it was really hard to find it. And so once you get it, you kind of really want to hold on to it really tightly, and yeah, you maybe do get a bit too involved. But I think that's fine. I think also that means that you can see it with a clear eyes in terms of like, you know, I don't shy away from talking about the things that the lesbian lines didn't do so well. And I think that's just as important about celebrating the things that they did do. And I think coming from like a place of family, that is a kind of way to speak to that history rather than it being from outside of it. I reference like Saidiya Hartman's work, Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experiments, if people know that book. It's incredible. She reimagines the lives of like black people during kind of like the Harlem Renaissance in the 19th century with fiction, and she talks about telling the story from inside the circle. And that's what I wanted to do with that history, is like tell it from inside. Like, who else is going to tell lesbian stories but lesbians? And like, so I can do it. I can try. Anyway, I can try.
I'm glad that you chose to try.
And decided to work.
I succeeded. No. What I think is really great as well is that so much of this material, I mean, a lot of it has been lost, but a lot of it has actually been preserved. There are more and more archives popping up every day, and a lot of them are open access. Like, people might not think that they're for them, but like, for example, the National Library of Scotland has a huge LGBT collection, and anyone can just go and look at it whenever they want. We have our own queer archive, Books Archive Lavender Menace, which is, you know, cataloguing books from the 80s and 90s, and that is open access, anyone can visit any time. And I think there's this idea that these things are like at one remove or like behind a pane of glass, but they're absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, the logbook kind of is, because that is a closed archive, because it has sensitive information in it, but in general, yes. Or like, and access is a real issue. Like, the London Lesbian Archive is in Glasgow's Women's Library, because it lost its funding in the 90s and it was going to go, and they were the only people that managed to scrape together, you know, some money to look after it. So, but also you don't need a reason to go to an archive. I think that's what always stopped me. Like, I didn't have a reason, and so once I had this like residency, I had a role where I was a writer. I could go look at stuff, but you don't need that. Yeah, you can just, it is our history, and yeah, and archivists are really nice, and they're like very excited to tell you about what's in their collection.
Like, look at this flyer. Yeah, this one has a drawing.
Yeah. And you find, I mean, when I first went to like Islington Pride, my favourite bit of it was these two lesbians had just donated their archive, including like some stuff from Green Common and like badges and stuff, and it was just in a Sainsbury's bag. Like, they just stripped it in, and like, you know, that is the reality when you give something to an archive. They just like cleared out a drawer. Yeah. And then I was like, ooh, ephemera. Special resonance. And yeah, that's how I saw it, all in this bag, and then I came back, I think like the next week, and they like catalogued it all, and it's all like neat organised, and the bag was in the bottom of the box. Oh, yeah, which is very exciting. But yeah, like, you can also just donate to an archive as well. Like, I think that's something that we should all think about too, in terms of like, what is the ephemera that we're creating now? We're creating history now.
For sure, yeah. I play roller derby, and the Glasgow Women's Library holds the National Museum of Roller Derby, and so they have a lot of our stuff. And when I briefly moved away from Edinburgh, I gave them like loads of my stuff, and it now lives there. And some of our teammates went to visit like last year, and they were like, "Wow, they got a lot of your uniforms." Sorry.
That's probably lost as well. Yeah. It is amazing that you'll find like a flyer from like some event in the 70s that someone like hand drew and then like, you know, photographed or whatever.
For sure.
It's somebody somewhere saved a copy of it and shoved it in an archive.
Yeah. Do you have a favourite archive?
Oh.
All the other archives.
Archives in the room. All my favourite. I mean, I think, well, I think the Islington one is my favourite just because it's like local and small, and going in was like going to like a school with like Formica tables. I felt like this church is very comforting to me. I grew up in going to a Baptist church, and it smells just like my church. So it's very, I like a homely, like old school archive. I mean, obviously I'm like obsessed with the lesbian cancer archive in New York, but I feel like who isn't? Like that's such a
obvious one.
so basic, yeah. But yeah, just this week I sent off my book to be in that archive, which is very cool. And like a full circle moment, so I'm going to talk about that archive, which also started by a group of lesbians just in someone's home as well, which I love.
Oh, is that the one where they had to buy a second house?
Yeah, they have a new house now in New York.
That's
yeah,
amazing.
You can read like academics that go to it, and they're just like, oh yeah, I was in the bathroom and I found like this stack of papers, and I just rammed it full because they just said yes to everything. Like at the beginning, I think.
I also really love imagining like a historian in there being like, none of this is.
Yeah.
Books are going to get wet.
Yeah. And the whole point is like anyone can volunteer as well. I just need to be trained.
That's cool. I like that a lot. I'm going to come back to the book after some archive chat. The other part of the book, so we've got the kind of the critical fabulations, to steal from Hartman, and the memoir bits, and then the rest is kind of this like, it covers a lot of ground. It's like a very expansive lesbian history from kind of the end of the 19th century to today. You were like, must not miss anything. Did you start off being like, and I'm going to write the history of lesbians?
No, I think it just nice. I mean, and obviously it's like a really history, and it's like at one point I was like, my subject is lesbians, which is too big a subject.
Let's become an expert.
All lesbians, yeah, and I think you know this book is supposed to be accessible for anyone to kind of read. So I guess I just wanted to kind of whiz people through that kind of history so that they've got a bit of a knowledge of it, but in a kind of fairly light way, so that it's not too bogged down in academia. But there's enough of that kind of history that you get the kind of context and where we've been from. And you know, I think it really was just me grabbing everything that I've learned about lesbian history, because it's all over the place. And so just trying to like put that somewhere into, hopefully this book is like just another little, you know, node on the web of lesbian references or whatever, that maybe you find a reference to like The Watermelon Woman or something, and that sounds interesting, you go watch that film, and then you find something else, and you know, it's only just, that's how I found stuff, just like stumbling over everything.
Yeah, and people don't often, you know, even if they are lesbian and their topic is lesbians, they don't often go, right, well, I'll begin at the beginning. I'll keep going from zero. And then I'll get to the present eventually. Like that is how we read and how we kind of move through life. So it feels very organic to do that, to have like Willow from Buffy next to Sappho next to Case 2.
Yeah. I was just like any lesbian I can think of.
This one looks gay.
Yeah. That's the thing. I thought I definitely had a moment when I was like, Susan Sontag? Who knew?
And then,
like,
that's my favourite when you start doing research and you're like, them too? Elizabeth Bishop, that's the one for me. Like a year ago, I was like, how do I not know that? They're all gay. And one particularly interesting thing to consider through this history is how the definition of lesbian has kind of changed over time. And you mentioned, BiGS put it really well, that like in the past, people didn't really think of themselves as a lesbian. Like these identity categories that we have now are fairly recent inventions, and actually who you have sex with wasn't really anything to do with like who you are. But that has changed. I'd love to riff on that.
We won't talk about FIFA, you can do that yourselves or in the book. But this idea of like, I guess, lesbian identity and where we are now, where we were. And I think, language is always an interesting topic for any writer to think about. And I think if you ask every person in this room what the word lesbian means to them, you will all have a different answer. Positive, negative, you know, all sorts of different associations with that word. And that, to me, is so interesting of like, how do you share this word in a community with other people that maybe have different definitions of it or different kind of boundaries of it. And, you know, I see it as a very expansive term that we're in this moment now, and, you know, to really celebrate, I think, lesbians, and that it's a word, you know, for me it's a really personal word. It took me a long time to want to say it. I was called a lesbian jokingly around the dinner table when I found me, because I didn't have a boyfriend when I was 15. You know, Or like I say in the book, like I really wanted to be Sporty Spice growing up, but you couldn't be Sporty Spice in my school, that meant you were definitely a lesbian. I had to be Ginger Spice, obviously, and they didn't, you know,
Who actually
well, yeah,
now.
That's getting us away from a proper definition, actually.
It's an expensive definition.
Yeah, and I think it's just interesting. I would, you know, people that I interviewed maybe that were kind of out in the 70s. Some of them really like word dyke, and that was really important to them. It was a really working class word for them. That was the word that people shouted at them and threw bottles at them in the street, called them a dirty dyke, and they reclaimed that, and that was really important to them. And for other people, that's lesbian, that's gay. I interviewed Lisa Power, and she was like, oh yeah, gay woman was like quite fancy. It was like, gay women read Sappho. That was it. So, all these different, how that shifts over time and across, lines of class and race as well. Lesbian for some people, or sapphic as a very kind of Western.
Yeah, sapphic's getting a real resurgence lately.
Yeah,
I don't understand what's going on. Everyone's a sapphic these days.
Yeah, what's the right phrase? Yuck, someone's young. To me, sapphic, I think, because of the generation. Someone did call me elder lesbian recently. I don't to me, sapphic still sounds quite posh because of Sappho, and I don't really know any Sappho poetry. It's not my romance. But for younger people online, sapphic is a really useful term. It's a really inclusive term, in terms of just lesbian and queer women or kind of marginalised identities. It also doesn't get censored like the word lesbian or dyke does online, so that I think is also an interesting conversation in terms of how we talk about our identities online in the context of the internet. It is an interesting one, and I think it's brilliant that every generation thinks that they're reinventing things, and that every 10 years we have to have a conversation about what is a lesbian.
Absolutely. Oh my god, I had this hilarious text from my mum the other day because I'm now theoretically an academic. She sent me a message. She was like, could you please tell me what the academic definition of queer is? I was like, oh, I don't think I can do that. And then I was like, why? And she was like, they're having a big fight on TikTok about it.
But also, and interestingly, this fight that they're having on TikTok about is queer something, who it is, it's you culturally queer or whatever, right? But also, lesbians were talking about this in the 90s too, of what do we think about the word queer, guys? Some of them loved it, because they were actually quite this postmodern moment, we don't want to be a lesbian anymore, we can be queer, it's got no label, it's really exciting, expansive term for us. And then there were the lesbians being no, we are lesbians, that's the word we want, that's the word we really fought for, lesbian visibility is really important to us. So again, 30, 40 years ago, same conversation we're having now.
I think we're just going to keep adding words, and it'll be great. Everyone gets a word.
It's fine, just keep arguing about it.
There's a great bit in the book where you say, when we say a group is for lesbians, what exactly do we mean? And who are we talking about? And I've just written in my margin notes, what is the collective noun? Question mark, exclamation point. What's the collective noun for a group of lesbians? Sorry?
A beaver.
I was going to say U-Haul.
That's too American.
It is true, that's true. That was my one concern.
I did work very hard to make this book not American, because I think it's homogenizing lesbian culture.
But the book is coming out in America.
Yeah, it is.
So did you have to make a lot of edits to make it more American?
The major edit, all the weird spellings, was just they don't understand the word out. So when I said it went out, the comments were the big line through the second out, and repetition. And I was like, no, it's a big night out. The next go out, they're all happy side,
I've got a couple more questions, but then I'm going to hand over to the audience. So if you could all start preparing emotionally and spiritually to ask some questions, I would really enjoy that. So I mentioned before that we have our own queer book archive here at Lovatt Menace, which is beautiful. Also, I work there part-time, so I'm slightly biased. But something I loved about the book and the content in the logs is how many people were talking about books. They were talking about what they were reading. There's a lot of books on tape in terms of accessibility, but everyone was like, what's the hot lesbian book? And it was great to see how important that was for people, and how I guess it's still the case today, given you're all here at a book event about lesbians.
It was a great way to find each other as well. I interviewed a few people, and they were some people might know Silver Moon Bookshop, feminist bookshop in London. There's a great book about it actually. But some of them were you would just hang out in the lesbian section at Silver Moon, and just find a lesbian that way if you need to find someone if you don't want to go to a club.
So if the internet goes down, just hang out in the lesbian section of Lighthouse. But there are your people.
It works. Yeah.
Do you have any fave lesbian books that aren't your book about lesbians?
Oh god. I mean, another inspiration was Jen Chaplin's book, My Autobiography of Class and Colours, which I think gave me permission to get to obsess about the subject, because in that book she's trying to write about Class and Colours, who was a lesbian, but I think the archive who owned it, which I think might be founding, didn't let her access the archive because they found out that's what she wanted to write about. And so she also has to like write about the subject without being able to access it, and she talks a lot about herself as well. So I love that book. I'm going to do loads more after. And I mean also like Audrey Lorde Sammy is a huge like a mythology. Again, like someone else mythologizing their life, I think in a really interesting way, kind of the OG of that.
I love Brandon Taylor, who writes novels but also sassy newsletters. Recently wrote a newsletter that was like, oh, there's another book coming out about someone going into the archive and finding themselves, and I was like, firstly rude, but then also, yeah, this has been happening for a really long time. This isn't a new trend. Like, people have been looking back and writing about their experiences with relationship for ages. It's just a slight sidebar. Last question for audience questions. Prepare yourselves. You mentioned earlier your absolute love of ephemera and physical objects. And it's kind of emphasized again and again through the book. There's like doodles, there's different people's handwriting, there's leaflets. And it felt so different to today. And you do mention trying to do some research on like even just the mid-10s internet and having real trouble finding the websites. And it just, yeah, there's such a stark difference. You know, you can go and sift through this stuff with your bare and or gloved hands. But the internet is much better. That's good to know. But yeah, the internet and our ephemera is harder to catalogue, and yeah, I guess I wondered how you felt about that.
Yeah, someone else asked me an interesting question about this, of like what the archives of the future should look like, which I thought was, because you're right, we think the internet has forever, but it doesn't. Like if you try to, I should look up like Deeper Magazine had these whole like online forums which are brilliant, but you have to use the Internet Archive, like the Wayback Machine, which is like, you know, a non-official archive in terms of what it's doing. They just happen to like capture certain snapshots of our history. And also I think, you know, so much happens on social media now, which we do not control, it's controlled by like very big corporations that don't seem to really enjoy the content, although they have to profit off it. And at any moment they can censor that and take it away, or, you know, close some accounts, delete someone's account, and, you know, your archive, your online archive is gone. So download things, screenshot things. But yeah, also we were sort of talking about maybe like oral archives being a nice kind of future. I really love oral archives anyway, so you get to hear people speak. So maybe that's another way in terms of like recording people's voices or videos. But yeah, you know, saving it and accessing it and distributing it is very complicated in terms of who can access it, how you access it, you know, who's running that server, how's it being maintained. Yeah, the internet is already kind of disappearing from the early days. So
for sure, yeah, I feel like they weren't thinking about how to save it when they started it. I definitely don't.
And it's huge.
Just print it all out.
Yeah, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Print out every page on the internet.
Yeah. Even if I think of like the number of photos on my camera roll, like who's going to go through that? Like 50% of my dog.
Yeah.
Just videos instantly. But like, you know, when do you ever look at them, or like how do you kind of sift through all of this kind of content that we now can create digitally as well as physically, to kind of safely and stuff?
The ephemera of the future is just going to be like 10,000 accidental screenshots that I took
of
my lock screen. You really never change your lock screen.
Interesting, like right, hold on. But that's, well, like the British Archive has to like keep old computers around for like floppy disks so that they can, you know, have things on floppy disks still. All that kind of stuff.
Remember those?
Remember that someone gave me a CD for Christmas, and I was like, no way to play this CD. I live in my house as a kind of.
I had an MRI a couple of years ago, and they gave me a CD of my MRI, and I was like, I can't look at this, and my doctor can't look at this. I don't understand. They were like, and they'll be like, what's on this?
Well,
no idea.
DVDs are like degrading now as well. So like, I was reading about like a very specific like early 2000s like Warner Brothers DVDs are like corroding, so you can't watch them anymore.
No way.
Yeah. Check your DVDs.
We thought they would last forever. And on that note, we're going to open up for questions. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and then Mary will come over to you with the mic. Over here.
Peters.
Yes, Peter. Yeah, exactly.
Hello. Oh, can you hear me at the back? The cheeks. Hi. I'm really looking forward to reading the book, and I also attended London Friends and volunteered for London Lesbian Research Board and the Lothian one.
Where were you when I was trying to research?
I know.
This is the one that you invented your life.
My question to you is, as at the place you are now in your life, what advice would you give to your 28-year-old self if they called the lesbian line?
Oh god, that's such a good question. And I definitely would have been too scared to call the lesbian line as well, just to say. I was Googling, am I gay? But I took real courage to call the lesbian line as well, because calling a lesbian line is already missing something, right? Like, if you're not sure if you're gay and you call a lesbian line, something's going on. What advice would I give? I think it would just be to trust in myself and keep finding my community. That was what really saved me in terms of figuring out things. There was kind of a group of us all at the same time having a similar kind of journey from like either thinking they were bisexual and thinking they were lesbian, or kind of coming out. And so having people around me with a similar thing was so important. So I think, and just to trust myself a bit more. I think I was so afraid of that, and it would be fun. I think, and that's the other thing that they would tell the lesbian line, it's going to be okay. Like, you can be a lesbian and it's okay. That was the big thing for them. So yeah, maybe I'd say that.
Is there another one in the room? There's one online, so I'll just read Carla's out, and then if you wave at me, I will look for you afterwards. So Carla has asked a similar question. Was there advice that you found in the prologue that feels evergreen, that may be less familiar to the modern lesbian audience?
These are really good questions. This is such a good question. Oh god. It's tricky because they didn't super give advice in that. I mean, they were really, a lot of the time they were listening service, they were listening to people about what they needed. They didn't necessarily like dispense advice, except for like, this pub is a nice gay club, it's really fun. So, I mean, there's one call that they get from two girls that ring up that are being bullied at school, and the teachers at school, because they're lesbians, the teachers at school said to call the police. And they were like, that's terrible advice, we're going to call the lesbian line somehow. And they found the lesbian line and they rang them. And I think the advice they gave to them was sort of just to kind of stick with it, and that you're going to get older and you can come to these groups and you'll find your community. And it's kind of similar to what I said before, but just this sense of like, I think the lesbian lines were this really living example of that community, that it was accessible, that things were possible. There were these other futures and other paths you could take that would get you to a place of happiness or brighter future, or at least just safety, or away from something. So yeah, I think that's not so. I honestly don't think they said anything that was so groundbreaking that we would hear it today. There were different issues that they were dealing with. One of the lesbian lines would have a lawyer on call because there were so many married women in the 70s that were divorcing their husbands that were lesbians, and the courts would take their children away from them. So they needed a lawyer like on call to kind of deal. So the context is different, but the advice was similar in terms of like, find your people and you'll be okay, and
Anyone else in the room? Don't be shy. Yeah, okay, there's one here, and then I'll come see you back.
That's like we've covered it, all lesbians.
I really appreciated how in the book you talked about some of the more challenging aspects of lesbian history, dealing with race, dealing with trans callers, and callers like not being equipped really to help them. And I'm curious how you see the role of like services to, I guess, expand what lesbian community can do and who it can support, especially today given attacks on trans people.
Yeah. I think the lesbian lines, some of them, started out as a separation away from the mixed lines because they felt like lesbian issues and women issues weren't being addressed within these mixed kind of gay spaces. Not all of them, but some of them. And so I think what you kind of see play out within the lesbian lines from the kind of late 70s when they started through to like the 90s and the 2000s when they really ended in the kind of early aughts when the internet happened, basically. You kind of see, I think, the practicalities of lesbian sort of separatist thinking kind of play out in the sense that, like you're saying, they weren't terribly equipped to deal with trans callers at that time. There'd be a separate trans line maybe that they'd be referred to. If you're a trans lesbian, who do you call? if you're bisexual, there was no bisexual line as far as I'm aware, so like, just pick a side, kind of thing. So, you know, and you see them having these conversations in the logbooks about, yeah, how do we deal with trans callers? A lot of black lesbians said they didn't want to call, you know, the lesbian lines because they're predominantly white, volunteers that work there, and their issues kind of weren't being acknowledged in terms of the kind of divisiveness they saw within the community. There was a separate black gay lesbian line as well in London. So I think, and so what you see, I think, is that the ones that have survived, like Switchboard now, the London Friend, their lesbian line kind of merged back into their mixed line. I think you just sort of see them realise that they need this intersectionality. I can't say the word. That's a big one. There's too many big words in the book. Yeah, to be intersectional in their approach to community was what they really needed, and that's how they survived. So Dublin still has a lesbian line in Dublin. It's still called a lesbian line, but it is open to LGBTQ plus people. But it's mostly run, I think, by lesbians or kind of queer women or marginalised genders. So they found ways, I think, to make it work. I think they can make it work. I think that's the kind of lesson from that. So yeah, I don't know if that kind of covers your question, but it's a really interesting conversation. I think you kind of see it play out in terms of this, like, you know, real practical resource conversation as well, just about the fact that they were like, you know, they'd often have 1 or 2 nights open a week, maybe 1 or 2 people on the phones. They didn't know a lot around certain issues, and so did they spend their resources doing that? I mean, I think they should have. And if they're not, you know, and then there's an argument of like, well, no one's calling about that anyway, so you need to know about it, but obviously you're not going to call if you don't think you're going to get a good reception, right? So, yeah, I do think it's interesting how you just see that kind of conversation, I think, play out. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. So you talked a little bit earlier about, you know, some of the changes between the different generations, and I know that today so many people came out because of the lesbian master doc, and I was really wondering if there are like through lines that you really saw in a lot of these 90s calls compared to like exactly what we're seeing today in the lesbian master doc.
Totally. Great question. Do people know about the lesbian master doc? The lesbian what? Master doc. This is I think it's like technically now problematic, but I will get into that. Everything is. So it was a document that I think young-ish American person wrote about, like, basically, if anyone knows Adrian Rich's compulsory heterosexuality conversation around, like, how we are kind of conditioned to be heterosexual in the world, it's them working through that, basically, and being like, am I straight just because that's what the world and the culture has kind of created around me, and maybe I'm a lesbian. That's a really bad paraphrase, but it's on Google. It's on Tumblr, really, right? That's where I found it. I think the main thread between all of this is loneliness. That's what I see the most when I'm scrolling TikTok. I still see young lesbians saying, I'm lonely, and I don't know how to find other lesbians. And that was the same with the lesbian lines as well. A lot of people rang up because they were lonely, and they wanted someone to talk to. And this was like, you know, for some people this was the one time where they could speak to a lesbian, because maybe they're not out of their community, you know, maybe they're married to a man, they're in secret, you know, they're not able to kind of be part of the lesbian scene. So these lesbian lines are these really important points of connection for that and help their loneliness. And I think, I think we still see it now. I think there's still like a loneliness, problem happening within queer communities and not being able to find each other. And I don't know whether that feels worse online as well, it's kind of amplified. And you're also just like broadcasting your loneliness to everybody. You know, we've kind of lost, in some ways I think the lesbian lines have this really important, intimate one-on-one connection with somebody. You know, a phone call is really intimate. You can maybe say the wrong thing or figure things out, whereas today you kind of have to do it, you don't have to, but a lot of people do it on social media where they're talking to hundreds of people possibly at a time, which is quite terrifying. But that loneliness I think is the main kind of thread that I saw.
I'm going to do one online and then I'll hand over to you. So this one is from Kat, who says, hello. Do you think the community would benefit from a lesbian line today? It seems like a nice way to create intimate space to connect that's different from chatting online.
Oh, nice. That's like just what I said. Good work. Yeah, I think why not? I mean, you know, Switchboard is still running as a LGBTQ plus helpline. They do have a text service. You can email them now. But the phone is still ringing. In the COVID-19 pandemic, they saw a huge increase in their calls because people wanted that connection. So I think there probably is still a space for it. I mean, the Dublin lesbian line is still going. I think just someone could start one. Yeah, I don't know how much a phone line is nowadays. It was £75 and then I don't know when I started. But yeah, you see the phone line and just some volunteers, maybe some kind of guidelines that would to take. But information governance, yeah, there you go. Yeah, some GDPR thing probably these days. But no, I mean, I think, you know, there's still befriending services, and I think there's still a need for it, so I wouldn't mind seeing it. I think we've kind of found it in other ways, right? You know, the kind of community connections and pop-up events that happen and things like that, but they can feel quite ephemeral and quite hard to kind of pin down, whereas I think the nice thing about the lesbian lines was they were like, they did move, they were very structured, they were open this time, you know, you could call up if you could get through.
In the days of one phone line.
Yeah. They had an answer machine, but they would often not plug in properly and they get excited off about not plugging in.
Hello, thanks for a lovely chat. You've spoken a lot about what kind of how the writing of the book kind of affirmed your understanding of yourself as lesbian. And I'm interested if how writing the book changed the way you understand yourself as a lesbian.
Good question. I think at the end I'm like, not a big deal. Maybe it's not that important. I think I got it all out of me. But I also think you go through that journey right when you first come out, when like being a lesbian is like the whole thing. And it is like, it is really important. And I write about this in my coming out chapter. I'm like, coming out is not important, and it's also really, really important. And I like that kind of ambivalence around like, sometimes being a lesbian is really, really important, right? And depending on that context. But at home with my wife, I'm not like, wow, two lesbians just chilling out. Sometimes. But you know what I mean? So like, it's a like theoretical concept for ourselves. I'm not thinking, wow, two dykes. You know, and we're just ourselves. In the safe space, and the private space. I'm trying to call this back here. In the private space, like in certain spaces, I think it kind of knocks away, and you're just you, right? And in other spaces, it's really important. So yeah, it's maybe that in terms of like just, and like, I guess I could just talk about this with forever. I think it probably will, I guess. So yeah, I think it's a sense of like, it is really central to my identity, but there's also all these other things, right? And I think that's true for all of us. And true for the women that call the lesbian lines, you know. Being lesbian was really, really important, but for some of them it was like, I've got a house, and I don't have a job, and like, I need some help with this like really practical thing. Like I am a lesbian, but that, you know, there's this other things going on in my life that I need support with.
I was reading something again today by the historian Jules Gill Pearson, who was talking about the fact that, like, especially in today, our emancipation, especially as like LGBT folks, has to be highly visible. And I think she said something like, what would it be like if we were just left alone? Like, what if emancipation wasn't tied to visibility? And I think about that a lot. Like, what if you could just be in your house, not say, I'm a lesbian?
And it's like a privilege that we've earned from the work of lesbians who make themselves incredibly visible. Like, Campaign for Feminist Equality, their tagline was like, it's good to be gay, like come out for gay equality, right? Like that, their political point was to come out, to be visible, to say, like, I'm a lesbian and I work with you, and like, that's fine. You do know a lesbian, you know, that was the whole thing. People thought they didn't know gay people, but they did, and they were their workmates, or, you know, their brother, their sister, whatever. And so, I think we've earned a bit of a right now to kind of push back against that visibility a little bit, and like that identity.
And if you ever want to be visible, you could just wear the hat.
Or a carabiner. There are all signifiers, and you can play into that if you want to, and not. Like there was a thing in like the 90s where like some of the old lesbians like getting annoyed that you couldn't spot them anymore because they like looked like everyone else. It was.
They don't wear Doc Martens anymore.
Yeah.
We did consult before the event. You were like, I'm going to wear the little chain, you can wear the neck chain, I'll wear the carabiner. Yeah, we're covering up like yes. To present them united. We probably have time for one or two more questions.
Yes, I've got one more online, and then I will hand over. Is there another one at the back? No, then I'll bring it to you. So this one is from Eddie, who says, any advice for a baby dyke who still finds lesbians terrifying and beautiful on where to start or look for a community?
Oh gosh.
Does that have you changed?
No, yeah, it's all fine. And everyone else is also just as anxious as you, if it's me anyway. I was also terrified. I went to Shiva, I don't know if anyone knows Shiva. I think I took it out of the book, but I just described one as an Anderson shelter.
Yeah.
And then I panicked that they might read it. I take it out in case, I don't know, we do it better. I don't want to anger them. So we went to Shiva, and I think, yeah, there is a bit of that, and I think that happens anyway in a club, right? Of like, everyone's kind of posing and look cool in their groups, and I think most people are like, not like that. We just need to find your people, like, you know, people would like play lesbian small lads and they'd be like non-scene lesbian, because they weren't part of the like going out scene and clubbing and stuff. And like I wasn't really, I did it for a little bit, but it's never really me. I had to ask my wife for a story about Candy Bar because I never went to Candy Bar. Jackie provided me with a story instead. Because like, I'm not that kind of lesbian. So you just gotta find your thing, like whether it's hiking or a choir or roller derby or hanging around in a bookshop, like they are everywhere. So you will find them. It just, yeah, it takes time, and yeah, they're out there. I think you just need to find your thing, what makes you comfortable in a space that you're happy with.
Hi again.
I love that you
You're
sound
very
like every
surprised, aren't you, Annie? I was wondering if anybody else used to play this game, German or lesbian.
We have a variation, because I'm very East London, so East London or just lesbian. Very much.
Very confusing as well if you go to Amsterdam.
Yeah. The Birkbeck stuff's a bit appropriated as well.
But my what's not really a question is just to respond to what you just said about, you know, we've come so far and now we can just be whoever we are, right? I disagree.
No, I agree, yeah.
I disagree,
I agree.
because this is the most dangerous time in the last 20 years I can think of, and that it's, if we feel comfortable personally and we feel able to be out, I think we have a duty to do that.
Yeah.
Because think of the women of Afghanistan, think of the women of America right now, who are, I'm sure lots of us have got friends in America who are currently terrified. I'm going to the States in June. One of the questions that you're asked on the ESTA, the visa, is to give details of your social media, your social network presence. Now it says optional. I'm not that convinced that will remain optional. You know, because shit is real right now. So I think we do have to stand up and be counted.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's like using our privilege, right? As well, I'm a cis white lesbian in London, like the most socially accepted lesbian you could get. And so yeah, I do think there is a point for putting your body out there and using it in your politics and being that loud voice for people that it is real danger for them. Yeah, I have a friend that's about to go to the US and they don't know if they can get in. Partly because of their gender identity, partly because of their background and their heritage. Yeah, no, I have nothing more to add except that I think you made the excellent point. So thank you.
I think that kind of community and solidarity is a really, really solid note to end on, to be honest. Yeah, I think we'll finish up there. And Elizabeth will be here signing books and selling merch. So please come say hi, continue the conversation. Thank you all for being such an excellent gang of lesbians and assorted. Yeah, thanks for coming. Not everyone. Oh, okay. Yeah, and Gary can take it.
Thank you.